So this morning I wanted to talk to you briefly about the divisions in this party, the political divisions, and is how I see them, how I see them developing. So when I was growing up, back in the Stone Age, there was a fundamental difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And primarily the Democratic Party was the party of Roosevelt that wanted to tax wealthy people and spread some of that wealth in terms of benefits for the middle class, benefits such as Social Security and the minimum wage, maximum hours, restrictions on factories, and vigorous enforcement of the antitrust laws. That philosophy didn't begin with the Democrats. It really began with the Republicans like Sherman, General Sherman's baby brother, senator from New York, who wrote the antitrust laws, which we still use today, the Sherman Antitrust Act, and Abraham Lincoln, Seward, and mainly Teddy Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal was patterned to a large extent after Teddy Roosevelt's economic program, which the Republicans refused to pass, so it never became law. Franklin Roosevelt picked up the mantle and he carried it through. And so basically the liberal Republican Party morphed into the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party still had that southern base, which was caused a lot of problems for the Democrats. Now the Republicans have them. So what's happened is that there has been over the years, a shift. And what we have today is today's Republican Party is not quite as a special interest fighting off the antitrust laws, stopping regulations, stopping tax. Not quite as bad as it was, or as distinct as it was in the post-Roosevelt era. They still, however, get most of their funding. Get most of the funding that comes from two main industries which are problems for this country. One is guns, and the other is fossil fuels. Now, I don't care for guns at all. I mean, I have some, but I don't feel that they're important or necessary. And I'm not the least bit sympathetic to people, Democrats, Republicans, or anybody who says, "Well, I need to have a gun to go hunting." To me, hunting is despicable. I have lots of friends who are hunters. They're nice people, but when it comes to that, they have a moral blind spot. How can you go out and shoot a beautiful animal instead of wanting to protect it? And I hate it when people say, "Well, we need to do it because of overcrowding, and they're eating all the food, and so and we're saving them from each other." That may be true, but there are ways of culling the herd other than weekend warriors going out and shooting and wounding animals and then following them as they bleed out. Well, I saw one story, a TV show once about a hunting preserve, and this moron had shot a deer, and the poor deer got tangled up in he couldn't catch. He kept following it all over the place, and finally he caught up with him because the deer was tangled up in a barbed wire fence. And this guy went over and shot this poor suffering deer right in the head, and then turned around and was all proud of himself, posed with his friends for pictures, standing next to this deer tied up in this barbed wire. So I'm not sympathetic if you tell me, "Oh, I would need a gun to go shoot." You don't have any sympathy for me. My sympathy is with the animals. I just wish they could shoot back at you, jerk. Anyway, please don't take offense. You're a jerk for doing that. So I'm not sympathetic. A gun for self-protection, yeah, I can see that. And we do have a Supreme Court decision saying that, yeah, under the Second Amendment, you should be allowed to keep a gun in your home for protection. Now, that decision was really badly analyzed and written, because it was based primarily on what was happening in England in the 1600s when the Catholics were not allowed to have guns, but Protestants were allowed to have guns so they could shoot the Catholics. Yeah, hardly a basis for establishing a constitutional right. But it is what it is, it was what it was, and that's the law of the land. And I don't really have a problem if you really are in a situation where you live in a dangerous neighborhood, like I do, Jupiter, Florida, and you need a gun. You think you need a gun because there's people breaking into houses, there's gangbangers hanging out in the street corners. I don't really have a problem with that, which has nothing to do with your right to own an AR-15. So the idea that anybody should be allowed to have one of these assault type weapons, and bear in mind, these are not just semi-automatic rifles. They have hair triggers on them. They have rounds which go at a tremendous velocity, which means if they hit any part of you, they'll just blow you to pieces. And no, we don't need those. Those are deliberately developed for use in combat to kill human beings at a distance, even if they had some kind of body armor. That's what they were developed for. You can have a semi-automatic rifle, which I don't think you should have either, but you can have one of those which would require some time between shots, a few seconds at least. They don't have large magazines. They're not. They don't have high velocity rounds, and you don't find those used in these mass shootings. The mass shootings are almost always the assault type weapons. So we don't need those, and we wouldn't have them except for the fact that we have this gun lobby which pours money into the Republican Party, and the Republicans, to a man, stand up and defend these people and say the stupidest thing like that's a Second Amendment right. And those of you who are inclined to say, oh yeah, Second Amendment rights, I challenge you to tell me with an honest face, not your usual lies, that you've read the Second Amendment, or that you've read any of the cases about the Second Amendment. If you've read or studied the Second Amendment at all, you won't be saying that you have a Second Amendment right to an AR-15. It's ridiculous. So, but that's because of a special interest lobby that pays a bunch of money to Republicans. And some Democrats, but very few. And a lot of that depends on the state in which you live. If you live in Montana, like John Tesler, then he probably gets money from the NRA. But it's a terrible thing. And the other one, of course, is fossil fuels. The oil industry, the gas industry, all of these people that pour all their money into the Republicans, who do everything they can to do anything to stop any restrictions on fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are killing this planet. It doesn't mean you eliminate them. You don't. We don't. We export. We're now a net exporting nation under the Biden administration, contrary to what the Republicans' propaganda machine tells you. But we need to be doing something about that, and the Biden administration is making efforts. Democrats constantly are talking about doing something to protect the environment from the oil industries, and guess who never says a single word about doing such things at all in any way, shape, or form? The Republicans. Find me a Republican who has anything to say about restricting fossil fuel consumption in any way, shape, or form, and I will give you my entire fortune in Bitcoin. That's right. Everything, all the Bitcoin that I own, I will give to you if you can find me a single Republican who does that. Shut up, Francois. They don't know I don't have Bitcoin. Gosh, the dog. So, that's my pet peeve with the Republican Party. Having said that, I see a big, gradual, but now becoming massively visible change. And the change isn't so much between Democrats and Republicans. The change is between moderates and extremists. And what's happened is both parties have them. The Democrats have moved further and further away from the extremists. You still have extreme leftists in the Democratic Party, particularly relates to some of these issues like woke and restrictions on some of the awkward restrictions on speech and looking for the cancel culture, that type of thing. Republicans have that also. Anything which indicates, in a book in a library that the gay people are okay, they want to ban it or burn it or whatever. It sounds kind of like the Nazis again. But that's kind of the extreme of the Democrat. But almost all of those people, led by Bernie Sanders, they have moved right into the mainstream. The Democratic Party under Kamala Harris, so they say, why has she changed? Why has she changed? She's changed because the Democratic Party has changed. And that was shown when they nominated Joe Biden the first time. It's moved way away from the leftist extremists and toward the center. You know who else has moved toward the center? Mainstream Republicans in droves are deserting the Republican Party and moving to the center. A lot of it is women on abortion, but you see these on all these talk shows, and I watch a bunch of them. I shouldn't, but I do. That have been, people like, I saw that person was Republican, and now they're siding with the Democrats. You've got a movement now with Republicans to the center, and how do we know that on a massive scale? Pay attention now. Don't get out of that kitchen. Get back here. Sit in front of this your screen. You can go eat later. Good God, Craig. So, don't eat when you're talking, when you're listening to me. That's quite rude. I can see what you're doing. That's right. You're going to end up fat like my dog. I'm sorry, Francois. I thought he was asleep. So, what you've seen is the red and the blue states. When I was a kid, New York was often a red state. So was California. They're not red today. They're solid blue, and no one and with a straight face suggests that those states are going to come back to the Republican Party. Do you know why? Because Republicans left those parties in droves in those states and became Democrats, because those people were always moderate, and as they saw the Republican Party moving further and further to the right, they just, it's like the saying is, I didn't leave the Republican Party left me. And where did it go? When did all this happen? When did the Republican Party begin to desert its common sense, middle of the road people? And a lot of those people were Republicans not because they favored big special interests like Rockefeller and not, I'm talking about John D, not his grandson. John D. Rockefeller and Carnegie and Frick and Mellon and all of these industrialists, who was the Commodore, I forget his name. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. So, so why did those people leave the Republican Party? What caused it? What did we see a similar movement of people away from the Democratic Party in the same time period? Let me think. Oh yeah, we did. Yeah, all those southern states that were solid Democratic states because they never forgave Abraham Lincoln, and nor should they have. All of those southern states, they became Republicans. So the switch has been from essentially racist Democrats, and they were, no doubt about it. If you grew up, watching George Wallace, who later became just the opposite, but when you watch George Wallace in his heyday, segregation now, segregation forever. When you watch Strom Thurmond, when you saw all of these Democrats in the South being, just as racist as you can be, by that I'm not just talking about the leaders, I'm talking about the people that were voting for them and cheering them on and so on and so forth. They became Republicans. At the same time, Republicans seeing this said, I don't think I want to be associated with those people, and they became Democrats. And that's what's going on now. So that started, the person initially responsible for the beginning of that change was Harry Truman. What did Harry Truman do that was so terrible that the Southerners started leaving the Democratic Party after Roosevelt had done so much for them, including rural electrification? They didn't have electric power in the South before Roosevelt came along. They were so grateful to him, and also price supports, which a lot of people criticize, but if you were a farmer in the South, you were damn glad to get them. Truman came along and had the absolute gall, and he was a Southerner. He's from southern Missouri. I went to high school in southern Illinois, right across the river from southern Missouri. I kind of know how those people think. He was a Southerner. He integrated the armed services after World War II. Integrated them. Let black people serve in the same areas as white people. Same platoon, same everything, same barracks. Imagine that, allowing them to live in the same barracks with the white folk. And a lot of the white folk in the military then and now are from the Deep South. So Harry Truman integrated the armed services, and that was when the white Southerners started to say, I don't know about that. I thought he was one of us. I thought he was one of us. I can talk like that because I was born like child Louisiana child. I'm basically a Southerner. Born Lake Child, Louisiana. I live in Gulf, Mississippi. I have tried cases all over the South, and I speak the language of the folk. However, having said that, that's what Harry Truman did. Okay, you got over that. It's just the military doesn't bother most of us. Then along came that horrible radical John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and he sided with that Martin Luther King fella. And then John Fitzgerald Kennedy, he introduced the Civil Rights Act. Now, I remember, I'm putting on my Southern voice now because you understand how upset I is. I remember I think it was June of, just before Kennedy was shot, so that was 1963. And he gave a beautiful speech introducing the Civil Rights Act. If you get a chance, go find it. You can find it somewhere these days. You can find anything on TV. Go find that speech. I saw it recently. It was the most inspirational speech I've ever seen by a politician. And that included other speeches by Kennedy. It was a beautiful speech. That's when he introduced the Civil Rights Bill. Now, that Civil Rights Bill didn't pass while Kennedy was alive because he was shot before he could get it passed, but it was passed really in his honor. And that was when the Southerners started saying, well, wait a minute, this Democratic Party, we had John Kennedy, we barely voted for, and then we get this Lyndon Johnson, who we thought was one of us. He signs that Civil Rights Bill. The Democratic Party is just a party for the Negro. And sure enough, boy, they started deserting the Democratic Party in droves. At the same time they were doing that, the Republicans in the Northeast and in California and other civilized states, they said, those people are leaving our party. Those people are leaving the Democratic Party, joining Republicans. Do I want to be associated with people? Do they represent how I see the world? I still see the Republican Party as the party of Abraham Lincoln. And sure enough, they all started flocking away from the Republican Party into the Democratic Party, and that's why we have this breakdown between red and blue states. We didn't have red and blue states in this country from the Civil War up until the aftermath of the Lyndon Johnson administration. This red and blue phenomenon is relatively recent, but if you look at it, you can compare that to a map of the Confederacy versus the Union. They're almost identical. The only difference has to do with the western states, which are most of the western states, at least right in the aftermath of the Civil War, were populated by Civil War soldiers from the Confederacy who had guns. You've seen them in the movies. They flocked out there because they had guns and no jobs and nothing else to do. They went out west and brought their philosophy with them. In fact, that started when the Southerners started sending people in droves out to Kansas and Nebraska, so that when those territories came in, they would come in as slave states. Too much history, I know. But you should know your history. You should know the history of this country, because people who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And I look at all history. I study history of World War I, World War II. You can see these maps changing, and you can see attitudes changing, and you can almost predict where the next war is going to be by what happened in the last war. So here we are with the red states and the blue states, and what's happening now is more and more normal Republicans are flocking over to the Democratic Party. I had a friend of mine commenting the other day on some of my opinions, and he says, "Look, Ed," he says, "just quit talking about the old Republican Party. These are new times. This is the party of Donald Trump." And I said, he's right. We still have remnants of the old Republican. Don't tax the wealthy. Obviously, every Republican comes in and slashes taxes for the wealthy, so that hasn't changed a bit. And refusing to regulate industries like arms and fossil fuels, which are harmful to society as a whole, the refusal to do anything to regulate them in any way whatsoever, those things have not changed. But what has changed is attitudes about race and extremism. And Donald Trump is the perfect extremist who's come in here, riles up the people, particularly in the rural areas, in the South, white men, usually without much education. And by that I don't just mean formal education. I mean they don't know squat about anything anyway. They just get all their news from Fox and places like that. So, and I say I watch Fox too, but it's not all I watch. Sometimes I watch cartoons. I know. What's the difference, right? Oh, that is just rude and cynical, saying that about cartoons. So anyhow, you're seeing this change. You're seeing more and more people like Brit Hume and Goldberg, and there's a whole bunch of these people that used to be really hard right people, and now they've all come over and they're all Democrats, because they just can't take this anymore. The Secretary of State of Georgia, for crying out loud! All these people, we can't handle this kind of ignorance and bigotry and anger of today's Republican Party. So what's happened is, because of Trump, the Republican Party has become the party of extremism. It had become the party of the Confederacy. Now it's becoming the party of the extremists in the Confederacy. And the Democratic Party is fortunately moving toward and staking out the center. So we got an election coming up. Let's see what the American people choose: extremism, or, in my opinion, moderate, middle of the road reasonableness. That's how I see the distinction. I'm sure that there are some of you out there who may disagree with me. I know that Francois does. But that's how I see it. And I've just given you an historical perspective. You can take it or you can leave it. You can do what you want to with it. You could ignore it. You probably turn this program off as soon as I start ranting and raving, which is what I usually do and what you usually do. So having said that, I want you guys to go out there and I want you to have a good day. No, this time I mean it. Usually I'm being cynical and sarcastic and I hope you have a lousy day. This time I really hope you have a good day. That's because I'm changing.